Conversations That Matter is a partner program of the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I'm fascinated by the work that you're doing around renewable cities. Not just the concept of renewable cities, but what you're doing to bring together other communities to talk about renewable cities. So what is Renewable Cities, the program that you are running? Maybe you can explain it.
Sure. I'm the director of the Center for Dialogue.
Yes.
And at the Center for Dialogue, we have this stream called Climate Solutions. And I got involved on climate change issues about 10 years ago and really got actively involved after the Copenhagen conference and saw what wasn't working. And for 4 years worked really locally at municipal levels, helping them transition to low carbon economy, low carbon transitions. Got to a stage where the scale just wasn't there. And I was invited in March 2013 to facilitate the hearings at the European Union on the transition to 100% renewable energy. And I have to say, I thought it was a bit of a flaky concept, this idea that you could move to 100% renewable.
You thought it was flaky?
I thought it was flaky. I thought at that time, now that's, almost 2 years ago, that was just a bit too far-fetched. I thought, we're talking about 80% reduction by 2050. I just didn't think you could get to 100% renewable. I went to that conference, I facilitated those hearings, and I walked away saying, boy, I'm missing the boat here. This isn't just doable, it's inevitable. That we just didn't have the conversation going on in Canada that was going on in so many other parts of the world. And so I came back and went and started looking much more seriously at the transition to 100% renewable and really the role of cities. So Renewable Cities was created as a program to focus the transition to 100% renewable by cities, so part of a larger global movement.
So what did you learn that you were missing out on? That was that kind of missing link that says this is possible, it is doable?
Yeah, I guess I never looked at energy so much as a process, that you can create energy where you're using it. I'm sort of used to the big idea of the big grids, and energy is something that's created over there, distributed, and used in a city. I didn't actually recognize that you could produce energy within a city in microgrids, that you could have this really distributed energy, and then you could connect to a larger grid for resilience. And that there were many forms of renewable energy that were far cheaper than I had ever recognized. China working in this space, they are leading the way.
China's leading the way.
Well, they want to own this market. They see a really strong economic opportunity, and they have the imperative of air pollution and climate change in their own country, and so they want to get to energy self-security.
You're the second person that has talked about China being out there on the forefront, and a year ago everybody was saying, oh yeah, but with China, like, forget it, nothing's going to happen. But it appears that they are surging ahead.
Oh, the investment that China puts into renewables is astronomical compared to the rest of the world. It's sort of the space of innovation right now is in China. They've showed our solar technology companies here how quickly they can move on solar when they decide that they want to move. And so China is on the forefront of this, which is interesting. I think it's easy for us to say, oh, look at China, they're creating all these coal-fired. They're actually closing now.
I think they've stopped, haven't they?
That's right, and they're moving to renewable. Every mayor in China has to go through training on renewable energy. Every mayor, it's part. The mayor has to. So there's a real shift going on in the world that I think we were kind of oblivious to here in Canada. And so then we began working with the City of Vancouver, and the City of Vancouver, as you know, has already laid out the Greenest City Action Plan, and renewable energy has always been a part of their plan. But they moved a little bit more quickly in becoming the first Canadian city to put their flag, in a sense, in the sand and say, we're going to be 100% renewable. And they were the first, and they're the fourth in North America, and they join a growing number of cities that are doing that internationally.
So before we get to what Vancouver is doing, tell me a little bit about, you come back and you say, okay, I'm going to get focused on renewable cities. Right. What did you go about doing that created the conversations that you now have happening?
So what I did is I went and interviewed over 100 people across the country and internationally to really get a sense of what is within the toolbox that cities can do and what is not within their control. and then began to look at how do we create a program that really builds on the existing leadership. Let's not recreate anything. Let's really build on what's already going on in the rest of the world. And let's make Vancouver a hub of dialogue and exchange on that, because if we can bring the key professional folks that are working, that are actually doing the work with the elected officials, let's get an exchange between them and let's see if we can move the dial. And that's what we did. So we created a global learning forum, which we held in Vancouver in May of 2015. We also began mapping out who was doing what in the rest of the world. And we started to look at where there were possibilities for cities, where the limitations and barriers were, and then began to look at best practices in other jurisdictions so that we could bring them home to Vancouver.
So you've become an information hub in many ways around renewable energy when it comes to urban landscapes.
Yes, and I think one of the other things that we've done is we've become this kind of impetus for a global network. It's that we're a bit of a driver of a network that was created. The City of Vancouver hadn't made the commitment before we got involved, and then after they made the commitment, they went to Korea and created a network called the Global Renewable Energy Network of cities. So it became very global very quickly, and so now the pressure is on to really deliver.
So what came out of the meetings in May? How well attended were they, and what were some of the things that helped to propel us or move us forward? Well,
I think there were a couple of interesting things that came out in May. There is a man named Zach Shanahan, I believe his name is. He runs the biggest website on clean energy, and he attends conferences all the time. And he came to the Global Learning Forum, and he walked away and he said, okay, that was the best conference I've ever attended, and I think it's going to change the way I work.
Praise.
It was. We heard that over and over again. And the reason is because we did something that's different. We didn't actually create a conference where a bunch of people talked at you through 3 days. We created an opportunity for people to come into the room, to bring their problems, to say, okay, this is the challenge I'm working on. I haven't figured it out. Help me figure it out. So we did series of these roundtables, and it could have been on finance or technology or legislation, and we would just do series of them. And in the end, they built out a sense that for cities that they weren't alone, that they could share their struggles and get solutions from other people in the room. So that was a very different kind of format, and I think that that's something that the Center for Dialogue brought. That changed the nature of the conversation.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you.
So when a community, it doesn't have to be a city the size of Vancouver or bigger, it can be a community, says, okay, we want to embrace this concept. Where do they get started? How do they engage in this?
So the first thing that you do is you have to look, I guess at the starting point is, in energy efficiency, you can get 70% of the way there by becoming more efficient. And one of the things that cities has control over is zoning. They can densify, they can put a whole range of different ideas into play that will reduce the need for energy, so reduce the demand. So that's the energy efficiency, and you can have green buildings, and you can have better transportation, and you can have more walkable. You can create places where people live close to where they work so that they're not having to get into their car. So
this is a benefit of having a greater density.
That's right.
Now, you go back 20, 30 years ago, people were talking about density as being psychologically not necessarily a good thing, but we're learning that that's not the case, and so to be able to embrace density is a good thing.
It could be. I mean, it's how it's done.
Yeah.
I think that there's still concerns about how we do density if we're not taking care of community, and we're not taking care of people, and we're not taking care of our health in building our community, then yeah, density can be a problem. But if it's done well, and it can be done very well, it can actually create community, and can create much more vibrant streets, much safer streets, and much more vibrant places for kids to grow up.
Well, I have to tell you, this morning I was walking down Richard Street, and it struck me that there's trees everywhere, and the street seems much more settled for one of the main streets through the west end of Vancouver than I remember it going back to the you know, the 90s and 80s and so on, where it was sort of a mix between downtown, industrial, the entertainment district, and here I was walking down the street, and without having paid attention to the change or the transformation on that street, I thought, oh, this is a nice street to walk down. And yet I didn't think that 20 years ago.
It's interesting how much our city's changed, and I actually have to say I like it better now.
I
and
agree
part
with
of
you.
that is that we've taken care in terms of trying to create public and green spaces. We've taken care to create places where people live, close to where they work, but also to try and put community amenities in those spaces, you know, playgrounds, green spaces. I love the bike lanes. I love seeing green ways. I love the fact that we're increasing the canopy, the number of green trees throughout the city, or community gardens or community orchards. Those all make for a more resilient, more renewable city. So those are important as well.
So we're doing a good job of that in the city of Vancouver.
We're getting there. We're getting there. We've got a long way to go. In the city of Vancouver, we made the commitment. Now we're 96% of the way to renewable energy on electricity, and that's because we have the benefit of hydro.
Yes.
And hydro is renewable. But we're only about 32% of the way on heating and cooling. We're still creating condos where everything is gas fireplaces, and we're kind of addicted to that, I think. So there's a big transition to make to get to not relying on fossil fuels. Our transportation, we've got a long way to go on transportation, but we're getting better. I mean, in 1996 to 2011, we had a 40% increase in our population in the downtown core. But because of really smart transportation planning, we reduced the number of trips by 25%. So that's significant in terms of greening our transportation infrastructure, but we can do a lot better on transportation. We really need to build out the infrastructure for electric vehicles. And one of the things that I think is so unique in Vancouver is you now can't build a new house without putting in a plug-in for an electrical vehicle. So that's thinking about, you know,
so
linking.
that's in the city proper.
That's right.
But not in the GVRD.
Not yet, or not within Metro Vancouver, but I have to say there are a number of mayors throughout Metro Vancouver who are on a similar mindset. The mayor of Coquitlam talks about you can't build yourself, you can't build roads and get yourself out of congestion. He really wants to see far more infrastructure in transportation, in mass transit. And one of the benefits is that we can electrify our vehicles, our fleet vehicles, we can electrify our transit. We're a rather dense metro area too. It doesn't feel like that, but we're surrounded by, we're a city surrounded by green, by the agricultural land reserve. And that's important too around renewable energy. And so if we can take and begin to build the infrastructure for electrical vehicles, we're going to be doing a lot better than we currently are.
I cut you off earlier when you started to talk about green buildings. What role does that play in the city becoming a renewable city? Well,
green buildings, I don't think people realize this, but 55% of our emissions come from our building stock. And so we have old buildings, we have new buildings, and we really have to look at how we bring down the GHG emissions. Now, one of the things that they have in Europe that they do probably far better than we do, and even though they're in colder climates in Northern Europe, they have passive houses. So those are, or regenerative buildings, which are buildings that actually create and support putting energy back on the grid. They're not sucks of carbon, they're not sucks of energy, they actually create energy. And we can start to put solar paneling, we can start to look at geothermal, we can look at much more district energy systems. I mean, one of the things that I love about Vancouver is we were the first city in North America to set up our own district energy down at the False Creek in the Olympic Village area. Yeah. And when people flush their toilets, guess where the sewage goes? It goes to create the energy that they're using. So the people in that neighborhood have some of the most innovative energy, and it's renewable.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you.
I have heard of this concept of basically moving the farm downtown and putting it into high-rises. Will that become an important component in the development of renewable cities?
I think that it's going to be an important component in the development of cities, period. I think that the cities of the future are going to start looking at vertical agriculture. They're going to be looking at space in a very different way. As populations increase, we have to look at how we use all of our available space. And I think, again, one of the things that's been interesting in Vancouver is we've already started that process with Soul Foods and others, where we're taking up land that is in transition to development and putting farms on it, organic urban farms. We've got beehives at the Trade and Convention Center and in a number of the hotels. So we're doing that work, and there's going to be more of that. I think we're going to see that increase. And that's part of, I think it's important to know that a renewable city isn't just about energy systems. It's about the way in which we live in a city. It's about the way in which we move in a city and how we prepare for climate change, how we develop jobs and economic development. And so yes, all of that will become part of a really renewable city.
So government can look after its own energy consumption the way that it does these things. From a legislative perspective, what are the things that governments can do to encourage developers and individuals to be able to embrace the concept of renewable cities?
Well, one of the things, and I think that we're seeing this move within governments, is saying, for example, that all new buildings will be carbon neutral. I think it could even go further and say that, you know, net zero positive, that they can actually be contributing.
But that would be legislated.
That would be legislated, and we already have that in Vancouver. You then have to look at the existing building stock, and you probably have to give more of a time frame, but, you know, perhaps by 2025, 2030, you're talking about the existing buildings starting to be carbon neutral. So that's the next sort of phase in the process. You have to look at how waste is treated. And where do we use waste, and how do we, so not all of our food and things are going into our waste stream, so how can we take that food and put it into other uses, whether it's on those urban agricultural farms or in some kind of biomass district energy. We have, in BC, we have all of this wood. Can it be used in a district energy system to heat, for example, the heat and cool and provide the electricity for hospitals?
You are aware of the Wastewood energy plant in Victoria, correct?
Yes, well, at Dockside Green was, yes, I was on the board of Van City when we approved that, and Nextera was the lead on that. Yes, and that's an example. Now there's been...
And when you take a look at the emissions from there, it's a little bit of a heat wave,
vapor.
But that's about it.
Yeah.
And yet it's all waste wood.
Yeah, yeah. And there have been challenges on that one. I think that we have to be realistic. We have to look at, okay, so they were first out. What have we learned from that experience? How do we ensure that we have a timber supply that's clean and appropriate for that kind of system? Those have been some of the challenges. And this is the kind of thing that we talk about within Renewable Cities, is that we might put out a technology and it might look great, but there are going to be problems. So how do you resolve those problems, and how do you get to a better level of that technology? And that's what's exciting from an economic development point of view in Vancouver and in this region. By saying we're going to be first out, that gives you a chance to start setting up the market mechanisms, the market sort of, it is a first move advantage. You start to be able to set the market and create opportunities for your own businesses. And we've got some great renewable energy companies like Nextera. And
right, because they are implementing this in Kamloops as well, as I understand, or a version of it.
Yeah.
I guess it starts to become site specific. How is it going to work within your community?
Yeah. And UBC has done some great work, University of Northern British Columbia, and we have one Corks has done, and up at Simon Fraser University as well.
The development community, then, what role do they play?
They play a critical role here. And one of the things that I appreciate about the development community in Vancouver is they're not afraid to look at innovations in green buildings. We have an incredible development community that really wants to demonstrate that you can do things differently here. And one of the things I like is that they don't look at renewable as just the environment and the technology. They're looking at it as social sustainability as well.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you.
And then it comes down to each and every one of us. What role do we play not only in our own habits, but how collectively we start to shape the marketplace.
Well, I think one of the wonderful things about where we're living is that there is an environmental ethos here in many of the residents of Vancouver. Not perhaps as much as I'd like to see. I mean, some of us are still very committed to our cars and very committed to our single-family dwellings, but that's changing. And certainly there's a younger generation that just don't have the same set of values. I know my daughter has no interest in driving a car, nor does my son, none.
My eldest daughter has been eligible to drive a car for about 3 years now, and she still doesn't have her license, and she's kind of like,
yeah, maybe.
Yeah, well, maybe, yeah. She
I'm
drives
trying to
an
tell them
electric
it's
scooter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that, and they're not necessarily looking for the large yard and the single-family house with a picket fence. They are, you know, my daughter wants to be downtown. She wants to be in the heart of things, or she wants to be on Commercial Drive. She's not interested in we had a big house and she hated it. She said, you know, I want to move. I don't like the fact that we're so separated here. It just feels like I get lost in the building and I don't see you and Dad. And I thought, what a thing to say as a kid, you know?
Yeah.
How wonderful is that as a parent to hear that? So there is a different set of values that are emerging. So I'm going to give you an example. You asked me what can we do, and I'm going to use an example of a group of residents at Yukon and 22nd, I think, in Vancouver.
Okay, yeah.
Called it Project Green Block. A group of houses got together and said, okay, let's see what we can do about reducing our ecological footprint. So they actually measured for 1 month their ecological footprint. So they had a baseline and they were shocked at how much resources they were using. And then together they decided that they were going to do a series of activities to really try and reduce it, not just as individuals, but as neighbors. So putting in gardens, trying to create an orchard within their city, really trying to reduce the use of their cars, really trying to reduce the use of buying things that required energy to produce them. So setting up tool libraries and setting up a library, setting up a lending shed for all of the kind of tools that they need in their gardens. Helping each other out in creating different kinds of gardens so they're getting a diversity of plant types. Really fascinating ideas emerged from that.
It's fascinating, and it's fabulous listening to you talk because you are speaking about the path forward with a sense of optimism. One of the things that does disturb me is that I've heard an awful lot over the last 10 years of, we're killing ourselves, it's all going to come to an end, we're doomed. And yet, when I listen to you, I think, no, we're not. We're going to figure this out.
I feel like that every day. I mean, one of the things that's wonderful about working at the Center for Dialogue is I get to talk to great thinkers all the time. And so I'm inspired. And so if I can spend my life bringing those people together to say, okay, what's the path forward?
You already are.
Yeah, and that's what I'm doing, and it's fantastic. Then it really does breed optimism. What's exciting is I think we've become a global hub on renewable, at least the thinking through on renewable cities. And the concept, the name Renewable Cities didn't exist until we coined it about a year ago, and now it's everywhere. It's like, you know, you couldn't find our footprints on it or our fingerprints on it anymore because it's owned by so many others now. So for me, that's the beginning of a movement, and we don't need to own it. It's a concept, and we just need to ensure that we're being a driving force to continue it. So.
Well, I think it's fabulous work that you're doing. I really appreciate you coming in here and sharing this with us, and we'll all be on this path together.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Sure.